So we'll see if you're awake. Hi, my name is Rich. Okay, yeah, some of you know. And I am a recovering youth pastor. For 8.5 years, I was in youth ministry, and Dana and I were young, and we didn't have Jackson or Grant. And then we were in our church in Alabama, and we moved, and Dana was pregnant, and Jackson shows up, and he was the little youth group baby for a while. You know, every little middle school and high school girl wanted to hold little Jackson and then later little Grant. And the boys thought it was tremendously fun to kind of corrupt my little boys. And youth ministry was so much fun. And there was a time, not anymore, but there was a time in my life that it was about the end of May, beginning of June, and I was itching for the summer. I could not wait for the summer when I had full access to my youth group. And it was weeks of camps. So it was middle school and high school camp, and then I took my teens to children's camp because they were a lot of the workers for children's camps. So there were summers that I spent 3 weeks at the campground, and then I usually took my teens on a retreat, and we'd go and do a retreat. Sometimes we took missions trips. We went to Trinidad 2 years. We took trips, took a trip to Memphis, took a trip to East Kentucky. We did lots of stuff in ministry, but camps followed a certain routine. And they didn't just start following a routine even when I was a kid. How many of you ever went to church camp when you were a kid? Okay, if you know, you know. Church camp, and it's probably not even really unique to church camp. It's probably true of almost any time you get away in a religious setting. Usually camps kind of followed the same schedule. We would leave home on Monday, and you'd be at camp until Friday. And it's just this week, if you were a close group at the beginning of the week, you have loved and hated everybody in your group at different points throughout the week. And you have been annoyed with everybody, and you've loved everybody, and it's been great, and you've heard all these messages, and you've sung songs, and it's not about you, but it's kind of aimed toward you. The speaker is aiming toward, if you're a middle school kid, middle schoolers, if it's children, toward children. And it's this time of revival. Does that make sense? And it always would happen about Thursday night, kind of peak camp, the spiritual high. About Thursday night, usually a teenage girl, no offense, usually a teenage girl would come up crying, I just don't want to go home. I love it so much here. You know, and they'd just be boo-hooing, and it's kind of understandable. You're in an artificial environment, and there's a snack shack. And there's this artificial environment, and it's a bit of a spiritual high. And you're away from the routine. You're away from home where people are on to you about doing this and this and this and this, or you have expectations. And you're with your friends, and it's a spiritual thing. And I don't know where the thought came. Just in the last couple of years I came across it, but usually the words would go something like this: I don't want to go home. I love it here. I don't want to go back to, and the phrase is, I don't want to go back to the real world. Does that make sense? And somewhere somebody said, and it has stuck with me, that the response to this young person in this hypothetical conversation, I've had a lot of them, but a perfect response was, you're not going home to the real world. This is the real world. Camp is the real world. This time together with the people of God, this is the real world. This where we're intentionally taking time for praise and worship and for encouraging each other and learning about Jesus. This is the real world. We're going home to a foreign land. And the picture there is this Old Testament world called exile. And over the next few weeks, we're going to be in the book of Daniel. And so I want you to open your Bibles and go to the table of contents. Do it. Go on. I'll wait. Go to the table of contents at the front of your Bibles and find Daniel, because here's what you're going to do. You don't know where Daniel is any more than I do. You're just going to do this. And you're going to miss Daniel, and so you're going to have to go back and do it again. So go to the table of contents and find Daniel. In my Bible, Daniel is page 802. Probably isn't in your Bible, but in my Bible, it's 802. We're going to be in the book of Daniel for the next few weeks. But while you found Daniel, are you still in the table of contents? I didn't tell you to go to page 802 yet. I just told you where it was in my Bible. Go back to the table of contents. I want you to find the book of Gedaliah. Gedaliah, Gedaliah. Gedaliah. Do you have the book of Gedaliah in your Bible? Just me? My special preacher version Bible? Okay, we'll address that in a minute. We'll talk about Gedaliah here in just a minute. Daniel, chapter 1. Go to book of Daniel, and let me give you a bit of a Bible nerd history lesson. I love this stuff, so just if you hate this stuff, hang in there. I'll be done in like 4 minutes. Okay, so the people of Israel were slaves in Egypt. They came out of Egypt. They came through the wilderness. They were given their own land that they had to fight for, but they came to the promised land. They were led by religious leaders called judges for a while, and then they said, give us a king. And God said, you don't want a king. And they said, yes, we do. And God said, no, you don't. And God gave them what they asked for. And they had King Saul, then King David, then King Solomon. And there was one kingdom, Israel. And then after King Solomon, Israel broke apart into two nations, Israel to the north and Judah to the south. Now, Jesus was from Galilee. Jesus' home was up in Galilee. That was up to the north. That would have been in Israel. Jerusalem was down in the south, and Judah down at the bottom part, in the south part of the country. And so the nation, after King David and King Solomon, the nation broke into two nations, and each of the nations had kings, each of the nations had prophets, each of the nations had armies. And over the centuries, people did what people do, and they rebelled against God. God had told his people, God had told the slaves in Egypt, God had told them when he brought them out of slavery, God told them when he made them into a nation, God told King Saul, God told King David, God told King Solomon, if you will obey me, if you will worship me, if you will follow me, I will protect you, I will provide for you, good things will happen to you. But if you don't, good luck. Okay, there's more to it than that, but it's kind of like you maybe with your kids or with the people that you work with. These are my expectations. If you do this, good things will happen. If you don't do this, bad things are going to happen. And so, Israel, about the year 720 before Christ, Israel was defeated by the Assyrians and just wiped them out. And the Assyrians, this is a story for another day, the Assyrians were awful. About the year 600, the Babylonians came and laid siege to Jerusalem, which is where we're picking up the story today in Daniel chapter 1. Now, the Babylonians were different than the Assyrians. The Assyrians would come in and do horrible, despicable, trigger warning things to the countries that they came in to defeat in battle. The Babylonians had a little bit of a different plan. And so what I want us to read this morning is Daniel chapter 1, and we're going to read it real piecemeal because there's things I want to draw out here as we go along. Daniel chapter 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, that's the king of Judah. He was a puppet king put there by the Babylonians, but he was the king. In the 3rd year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. Surrounded it, closed off anything going in and coming out. It is one of the ways that you would be defeated in battle back then and to today. King Nebuchadnezzar came from Babylon to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into Babylon's hand, along with some of the articles of the temple of God. Then he carried them off to the temple of his God in Babylon and put it in the treasure house of his God. Now, a couple of foundational things. You can just imagine being a Jew in Jerusalem, in Judah or Israel, thinking, our God reigns. Our God is strong. Our God is the true God. Our God is for us. We worship our God. We also worship other gods, but we worship our God. And so our God is strong. Our God is for us. Our God is going to protect us. And then all of a sudden the Assyrians come in and destroy Israel. And now Babylon has come in and laid siege and has now defeated Judah. And you're thinking, where's our God? Well, remember what I told you a minute ago. God told them, do this, and I'll help and I'll protect and I'll provide for you. But if you don't want to live that way, then the consequences of that are over here. And one of the things that King Nebuchadnezzar did, and what all kings would do, is we would go in. It was kind of like crushing you under their heel. They would come into the temple of your God. If they came into your city, they would come into the temple of your God, literally steal your God. That was usually like a stone idol or a wooden idol, and then take everything of value, gold, silver, precious ornaments, things that you would worship that you would use in worship. They came in, they broke into your temple, they took everything of value, and he just lugged it all off to his trophy case back in Babylon. But it didn't stop there. It wasn't enough that we come in and we defeat you in battle, and then I plunder your temple. Verse 3, the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of the court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians, and the king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's own table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter into the king's service. So, King Nebuchadnezzar comes to Jerusalem. He breaks into the temple. He takes everything that's of value and trucks it back to Babylon. But he doesn't stop there. It's not just about gold and about silver. It's about taking the best and the brightest of all of Judah. If you were smart, if you were strong, if you were good looking, or heaven forbid, all three. Am I right, Wes? All three. Then they took you and marched you 800 or 900 miles from Jerusalem to Babylon. And what did you get at the end of that trip? You got Babylon University. You went into training. Not so you'd be smarter and you'd be better at your job, but so that you could serve the nation of Babylon better. Picture that. We don't have we don't have an easy way. Maybe if we lived in a different country where we had experienced some pretty serious defeat and occupation, but in the United States of America, 250 years, right? Okay, we haven't gone through a lot of that. Other nations, this would make a little bit more sense. But right now, imagine if Germany had won World War II and we were all Sprechen Sie German right now. Yeah, I know what I said. Just imagine that we had been defeated and German culture was now our culture, and our American culture was waning and getting smaller and smaller. And what they did when they beat us was they come in and took all of our college material types, all of the strongest, all the high school quarterbacks. They're in Berlin now. All of our valedictorians, they were put on a ship and headed to Germany. That's what Babylon did. And there were lots of reasons for it, but we come in and we don't just plunder your temple for gold and silver. We take your best and your brightest and we take them and we assimilate them. We take them and bring them. We teach them our language. We teach them our culture. We teach them what we think and what we value. And we, Babylonians, are now forming the best and the brightest. Zeke just graduated high school. Zeke, are you sure? You got the paperwork, right? Okay. Okay, Zeke graduated high school. Imagine if somebody comes in and defeats us and they just come in for the best and the brightest and take them. And this wasn't for a time. They didn't go off and go to Babylon University. This was for the rest of their lives, to serve Babylon and to make Babylon better. Now, there's so much we're leaving out. Verse 5, the king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. By the way, that sounds awesome. That sounds awesome. Dana and I left after church a couple of Sundays ago. We spent time goofing off down here in the southeast United States. We ended up in Oklahoma in the last few days. That's where Dana is from. Our nephew got married on Friday night, and we had a rehearsal on Thursday and wedding on Friday, and then I drove home yesterday, and Dana's in Oklahoma with her mom for the next couple of days. But we have eaten our way across several states. I love me a good buffet. And these young men were offered not just food, but the best of food, the food fit for the king. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that to enter into the king's service. Verse 6, among those who were chosen in finger quotes, among those who were kidnapped from home and brought to Babylon, among those who were chosen, were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach. To Mishael, Meshach. And to Azariah, Abednego. They got new names. You Jewish boys, welcome to Babylon. You get new names. You thought you were Daniel, now you're Belshazzar. In the Old Testament, your name meant something. Your name meant something, and it usually reflected something about God or the land or Jerusalem. Your name, my name, Richard Mark. If I was born 2,800 years ago, my name would have been something, something, and that strong for God. Okay? Except in Babylon, you get a new name. And your name had nothing to do with the God of Jerusalem. Now your name had something to do with the culture and the people and the powers and the gods of the Babylonians. Now there's a pattern here I want you to pay attention to. Verse 8, And this is the kicker. This is the whole sermon, and then I'm going to try and be quick and wrap it up. Verse 8, but Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. Now, kind of like the story of Jonah. Remember Jonah and the whale, Jonah and the big fish? The story of Jonah, it's not about the whale. It's not about the fish. It's not about how long he was in the belly of the fish and whether there were digestive juices and can you breathe in there. It's not about that. And this story isn't about what kind of food was on the table. Because young Jewish people, the Jews, still today follow dietary norms. We eat these things, we don't eat these things. This is one of the reasons why I'm glad I'm a USA American type Christian. You eat what you want, pretty much. But I'm not sure if there was just a big bacon platter on this table. I don't know if it was pork ribs. I don't know what it was. But Daniel looks at this food and says, I can't eat that. Now, this is the first time he's objected. When they came, and whether they put him in ropes or in chains, and they started to lead him out of Jerusalem, Daniel didn't sit down and go, I'm not leaving. I refuse to go. When they said, we're going to start teaching you the Babylonian language, he didn't say, no, I will not. When they say, we're going to teach you the culture, I'm not learning that. But there was a line. There was a line, and Daniel saw this line with the food on the king's table and the wine that he was offered to drink. I don't know that it was necessarily about what kind of food it was. We don't know if it was food that had been offered up to the gods as sacrifice to the gods of Babylon, but there was a line, and Daniel could not cross that line. Why? Because he was still Daniel. He was not Belshazzar. He was Daniel. And he was the Daniel who had been born and raised in Jerusalem. And he was a member of the tribe of Judah. He just happened to live now in Babylon, but he remembered who he was. Now, I'll ask you this. How did he know that? He had been taught that. And it had been instilled in him. And verse 8 said, Daniel resolved. What's another word for resolved? Decided. I'm going to take my stand. I will not be moved. I will not compromise. Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the king's food. But he didn't do it swinging. He didn't come and cussing and storming and all through the place. Okay? Verse 8. Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way. We're going to see this again and again from Daniel. When they defy their culture, they do it amazingly, they do it with some measure of respect. Now, we don't always do that here. We don't always do that here today in our culture. I heard a funny story yesterday of a man coming up to his pastor. And a man came up to his pastor and said, hey, I witnessed to people yesterday at work. And he did. They said, oh, yeah, did you? Really? That's great. Tell me what happened. Well, we were in the break room, and some of the guys were telling a really dirty story. So I stood up and I screamed, you're all going to hell! And I shut the door on my way out. Okay, not sure that we would necessarily call that witnessing, but here Daniel just looks at this line and says, I cannot cross that line, and he goes to the king's official and he requests for permission not to defile himself. Now remember we talked about how Babylon's God had defeated Israel's God? Babylon's God was strong, Israel's God, Judah's God was weak. Babylon's God helped his army. Israel and Judah's God didn't help their army. Babylon's God is alive and well. Judah's God is dead and forgotten. No, sir. God's still there and he's still at work. Verse 9, God caused the official to show Daniel and his friends favor. There are times that God works kind of behind the scenes for our good, that we can't see it, we can't put our finger on, but God's still at work. God caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel, but the official told Daniel, look, pal, I'm afraid of the king. We'll see this a little bit more next week. King Nebuchadnezzar is crazy. I'm afraid of the king who has assigned you your food and drink. Why should he see you? If you're not going to eat from the king's table, why should he see you looking worse than the other men your age? Then the king would kill me. And look, Daniel, I like you. You're a nice guy, but we're not that close. I'm not going to literally stick my neck out for you. But Daniel said to the guard whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Isn't that sad? Isn't that sad? They got T-bones and baked potatoes and, the good desserts all out on this big platter. It's a buffet to end all buffets. And this guy comes along and says, what we really need is some cucumbers. That'd be awesome. Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the other young men who eat the royal food, and treat us in accordance with what you see. Test us. Take this out for a test drive. Daniel comes to the official and says, I cannot eat the food from the king's table. I can't. Would you allow me to just eat vegetables and drink water? And the guy says, I'm not sticking my neck out for you. And Daniel says, just test us and see. So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished. By the way, there is a Hebrew word for healthy. That word is not the word used here in verse 15. The word used here in verse 15 is fat. They looked fat. They looked healthy. We are so weight conscious in our world. They took Daniel chapter 1 and wrote a Christian diet book a few years ago. You can probably still find it on Amazon, The Daniel Diet. I don't know why you need a whole book to say, eat lettuce, you'll lose weight. But there was a book, The Daniel Diet. This is not about weight loss, because at the end of 10 days, Daniel and his friends on vegetables and waters looked healthy, plump. That's healthy in the ancient world. I'm well fed, I'm strong. Daniel says, test us out. And the official says, I don't know. At the end of 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the other young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice foods and wine and gave them only vegetables instead. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge. They were smart to begin with. They were without blemish to begin with. They were strong. They were the best and the brightest. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. God gave them knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. We'll talk about that next week. At the end of the time set by the king, 3 years, go to Babylon University. At the end of 3 years, at the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented all these young people to King Nebuchadnezzar. And the king talked with them and examined them. And he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times smarter than all the magicians and enchanters in the whole kingdom. Okay, this isn't about vegetables. It's not about bacon. It's not about water or wine. It's about Daniel decided not to defile himself. He resolved. He made a decision. How could a young person far from home decide that? He'd been taught. Now, this is a moms and dads thing, grandma and grandpa thing, and it's also a young person's thing, but it's also a grown-up's thing. Don't be surprised. Parents, don't be surprised that the culture is forming your kids. The algorithm is forming your kids. Every music star and TV star and celebrity and influence out there is forming your kids. And by the way, I'm being formed. You're being formed. We're all being formed. All of us. We're being formed. We all have something that we are following. We all have something that is forming us. Babylon said, we form the kids now. They separated them from home. They took them on a 700 or 800 or 900 mile march away from Jerusalem. They separated them from home. They separated them from their Jewish culture. They separated them from their place of worship and their families. They separated, by the way, the culture, the enemy wants to separate us from what is good and what is wholesome. They gave them brand new names. And Babylon tried to form Daniel into being a Babylonian. Folks, I think it's been said like this. Don't be surprised if you turn your kids over to Caesar that they end up being Romans. Don't be surprised when you let the smartphone raise your kids that they're not overwhelmingly conformed into the culture. Don't be surprised when church is a second or third or fourth option, and church is just a 1 hour a week, maybe tops 2, maybe tops 3 if you're here all the time, 3 hours a week. That's half the time that most young people spend on their phones a day. And it's not just young people. It's us grown-ups too. Don't be surprised when we let Nebuchadnezzar raise the next generation that they end up being Babylonians. The Assyrians would come in and squish you like a bug, kill you dead, and do awful, horrible things in the killing. The Babylonians were a little bit different. The Babylonians came in and took the best and the brightest and sent them to college. Gave them lots of good food and drink to have. Trained them. Took their strong suits and made it stronger. Not so they'd be better, but so that Babylon would be better. But there's a line. And as followers of Jesus, there's got to be a line with us too. We don't go swinging and spitting and cussing every time something isn't just like it is in Sunday school. But we've got to see a line out in front that I will not cross this line. And we're going to see it again and again in the book of Daniel. And I pray that the Lord will shed some light in your life. Where are those places that we can be involved? Daniel and his friends served in Babylon for the rest of their lives, 70 years. They didn't go away for a year or two and then get to go home. He lived the rest of his life making Babylon a better place. We are to live in this world, and we're to make this world a better place, but we're not to allow the world to get into us. How do we do that? I'm not exactly sure. But we need to ask the Lord to help us. Would you stand up with me? So I want us to pray together today. And I don't know, I'm at a different place than Zeke is. Are you 18, Zeke? Okay, Zeke's 18. I am no longer 18. There was a time when I was 18. And there's some people in this room that are younger and older than me, Zeke. Can you believe that? Okay? We're at different places in our life right now. But he's got some choices out in front of him. And he's got things that are influencing him. And he can't, do you remember, who did I say it was? Gedaliah? The book of Gedaliah? Do you remember who Gedaliah is? In my Bible, because I have a very special preacher version of the Bible, there's Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Daniel, and Gedaliah. You don't have Gedaliah. I have Gedaliah. Gedaliah. You know why there isn't a book of Gedaliah? Because he became Babylonian. He was in exile with Daniel. He was in exile, same as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He was the same as, he was brought out of, but when he got to Babylon, he was like, this food looks good. And he just became a Babylonian. He was just like everybody else. He didn't just serve the king, he became like everybody else. And they don't write books about people that are just like everybody else. But Daniel and his friends said, no. And there's more to that coming. And we need to know where those lines are. Would you pray with me?